talking about flowing. So first, what is flowing? Flowing is the way that we take notes throughout the round so that we can keep track of everyone's arguments. And second, why is flowing important? So the reason that flowing is important is because we do want to keep track of everyone's arguments throughout the debate round. It's also important so that we can extend our arguments all the way through the round so that we don't lose those arguments along the way as we give more and more speeches. And it's important so that we can address when the other team drops our arguments by not responding to them. So now we're going to look at the different parts of a specific flow. So I've done examples on the board. And the first part of a flow is the header. So for this example, the header is inherency. So the reason that we write that is because the first argument that the affirmative team brings up is inherency. So they say, our first contention is inherency, and you would write inherency at the top of your flow. Then after you have that header, the person reading the 1AC is going to read their first card. So the 1AC's first card talks about how the US sells arms to 73% of dictatorships and how this increases human rights abuses. And so I wrote that down here, and that's going to be our tag for that specific card. And you can see that I used some shorthand in certain places, so instead of saying that this increases human rights abuses and writing out increases, I used an up arrow to symbolize that, because when we're taking notes during the round and flowing, we don't want to be writing a ton because that uses a lot of time. So we want to try to use shorthand or symbols that we know mean certain words so that it doesn't waste all of our time in the round and it doesn't take up too much space on our flow. And then the next piece of this is the author and the date. So after you write the tagline of the card, that is the claim of their argument, you want to write down the author and the date, and there are a couple reasons for this. The first reason is that you want to make sure that the card is relevant within the round, because if the card has a really old date and it doesn't make sense for them to be reading it, you want to be able to point that out. So writing out the date helps you understand if the card is up to date and should be used in the round. And you also want to write the author so that you can refer back to these cards. So later in the round, if you want to talk about this card specifically, you can talk about how their Whitney in 2017 card says yada yada yada. So writing the author and the dates is pretty important on these, and you should be kind of starting to remember the authors and the dates as you go along throughout the season while you're debating, because a lot of the cards that are used have the same authors and you're all reading pretty much the same affirmatives and negatives a lot of time. So a lot of the cards should be familiar to you, and once you know the author and the date, it's really easy for you to recall those. They're going to move on to their next argument, which would be solvency in this case, and you're going to make another header and do the same exact thing where you write the taglines of the cards and the author and the date. And then their next argument in this case for the 1AC is the human rights advantage, and you do the same thing with those two cards, but you want to put that on a new sheet of paper so that you have enough space to talk about the human rights advantage throughout the entire round. So then after the 1AC reads their speech, the 1NC is going to get up and give their speech, and you want to make sure that you're flowing that speech as well in the correct spots. So where you would flow the 1NC's arguments is right next to the 1AC. And you probably want to use a different color so you can differentiate between the affirmative and the negative team. So for this example, I used black to represent the affirmative, and then any arguments that the negative team makes against this card, I would write it here, and I'm going to use blue to represent the negative. So we'll just write neg there. And so you'll do that throughout the entire thing. If the negative team makes an argument here, and here, and here. And let's say they don't actually make an argument about this card, then the affirmative later in the round would be able to see that if they're flowing correctly, and they can say, the negative team did not address our cup in 2018 card. And so you want to use your flow to be able to point out flaws in what the other team hasn't addressed, and to be able to respond to the arguments that they did make. So another important part when you're flowing the negative team's arguments is that a lot of times they're going to read a disadvantage. So the disadvantage in this case is usually the manufacturing disad. And again, since this is a new argument, you're going to want to use another piece of paper, and you're going to write manufacturing disad as your header, and you're going to do the same thing that we did here and write the taglines and the authors and the dates of all your cards. So after you've done that, you would have 3 sheets of paper for this entire debate round, and you would have your arguments really well organized, and you'll be able to call out the other team if they make mistakes, and you'll be able to extend your arguments all the way through. Something else that would be very helpful is if you have flows already made before you get into the debate round. So for example, if you're the affirmative and you brought in a sheet of paper that already had all of your cards written down, that would be helpful because then you're ready to debate and you're ready to just start writing the negative team's arguments when they get up and give their 1NC. So I would definitely recommend pre-flowing if you're the affirmative team, or even if you're the negative and you already know what disadvantages you want to read throughout the round. So now that we've covered why flowing is important, we can talk a little bit about how you can improve your flowing skills, because it's definitely something that you acquire over time as you debate. So one of the ways you can do that is by improving your shorthand, so things like the arrows or like shortening human rights to just HR. This is going to help you improve your flowing because you're not going to be spending too much time on those specific phrases. You can also do drills to improve your flowing. So one example of a drill would be whenever people would take like a deck of cards and read out what the cards are, like Ace of Spades, and then you write down what those are, and that can help you just getting like speed as you're flowing. You can also have someone just read you the affirmative or negative cases and then just flow and see how much you can get down without looking at the cards. It's also good to just keep debating, and that's going to help you be more familiar with those cards, kind of like I was talking about with the dates and the authors, because the more you read it, the more you know what they're talking about, and the more easily it's going to be for you to just write something really quick and you know which card already. So now that we know all the basics about flowing, you can begin just improving those skills.